Hi guys, it's Rohan again, and in this video we're going to be continue separating our big start method into more and more functions, and that helps the readability of the code, and it makes it a lot easier to debug later. Because let's say we know we have a problem with our introduction, and then we can directly go to this method and find the problem. So we're going to continue separating it. So we see what are some commonly used areas, because we don't want to repeat the same amount of code again and again, because that's bad practice. And then if you want to change it later, if you have the same repeated code, you can just change it once in your method. And then this is the case with our user response lines of code. And if you notice, we're actually always printing one line of code, printing one line as a string, and then we're taking the next line that the user inputs to a variable. So a better way of doing this is actually making a function called, and remember it's going to be private again, because we don't want other people to be accessing Space Adventures private methods that do specific things just for Space Adventures. They shouldn't have access to that. So we have private func because we're making a function, remember, and then this is going to be called response to prompt. And so remember we had our parentheses, and so now we're going to learn what those actually are. And so within our parentheses, these two parentheses, we can put parameters, which a user of a function can pass in parameters to our function using these, and then inside the function, these parameters act as variables. So if we want to make one parameter in our response to prompt function, we should probably call it prompt, because we're going to be giving it a prompt, and this is going to be a string. So when you make a function with a parameter, you have to let it know that it wants a string, so that when you use it later, it'll ask for a string. And then this is going to output another string, which is the user input, because we're going to get the response to the prompt. So to output stuff from a function, you use the little arrow, which is a dash and then a greater than sign. So and then you say what data type you are going to output of that function. So we're going to output another string, remember? So this is our function. This is our declaration. And it tells us that the name of our function is response to prompt, and the parameter is prompt, and we're outputting a string. So when we have prompt here, it's giving us the prompt, because when we're in this method, we can just pretend like someone will always be giving us a prompt. So we can say print this prompt. And because that's what we were doing before, like if you notice here, we were saying print what is your name, and then we were taking the user input. So now we can get the user input from here, and we can actually output it. And to do that, we say return to output a value, and then what we want to output is the readline call that we had here with our exclamation point that, remember, I'll explain in a few videos later on. And this will output a string, so that we had let name equals readline, and we had this chunk of code. What we can change it to now is get rid of this print statement. In fact, let's cut this string, because we're going to be using that string. Remember, that string is prompt. So we're going to change it to response to prompt, and we're going to call it, sorry about that, build failed, but because we're just not done writing our code. So we're going to, the string prompt we're going to enter is, remember, that string that we cut and pasted. So now we have our variable name, and it is, we store the output of response to prompt in the variable called name. And then, like before, we can access name just like that. So so now what we can change the rest of our code to use this too, because this is probably a better, just, you know, better, easier to read, stuff like that. So our other place where we were doing this is in this read line over here, where we're saying we're printing out this up here, and we're printing out that and then taking the input. And this was actually just printing it once before the while loop, and then a small change is that we can put it inside so that we can say, sorry, I didn't get that. And then instead of saying re-enter answer here, we can put this inside the loop, and I'll cut this string like we did before. Cut this string, and we say, remember, response to prompt, and then paste that string. And then we can get rid of that print statement. So now we're getting our decision, our response, user response to our prompt, which is this string, and we're using that decision to do some decision making. But so if you notice, there's still some more points that can be split up in our code, because we don't really want like little low-level things like printing and strings. We don't want a lot of that in our high-level methods. So we can put it. So what we can do is we can separate this part into another method. So 1 second. Okay, so we can split this part off. So we can cut and paste this, and then make another private method called say greet user. And we're not going to use any parameters this time because we just want to greet the user. It doesn't need an input. And then we print out our response to the name. And remember to call this up here so it actually happens. So now what we have here is the main. The main method is calling start. Start is displaying the introduction, then it's greeting the user. But we can still, there's this large chunk of code, even has a big loop in it and everything. We can definitely separate this. So we can separate this into a function called determine destination, maybe, right? So we can say, let's cut and paste this out, and let's remember we put all these functions inside our class before this bracket because it's inside our class. So, and remember we indent one level here. We indent one level because our functions are inside our class. So we're going to make another private function called, remember we decided determine destination. And remember, I'm using camel case, like always, determine destination. And I didn't mention it before, but up here, we have our capital S and capital A, because that's the convention for a class. Because our class is a noun usually. Well, always, it's a noun. And it's kind of like a name for something, so you capitalize it. These are methods, so you don't start with a capital, but then after that you have a capital. So we have our method here, determine destination. It doesn't need any parameters, and we can paste in here. So this will do the deciding. And then remember we have to call it up here, determine destination, for it to actually happen. And remember, I'm using Xcode's autocomplete to help me go faster, so I have to type less and less. So if we run this now, we have the same exact response, but now our code is very easy to read because it's separated into different functions, and we know the purpose of each small bit of code, and it does its own thing. This is actually very good modeling because we're modeling our code to various purposes that are easy to understand. And each function has its own purpose that's completely separate. And then if we were to test this code, or write more code to test this code, we could pretty easily do it because we can test each individual function, make sure it's working as a unit. And so if you remember, I ran this and it's working just like before. Yeah, it's working. So, so what we're going to be doing later is that in the next couple videos is these sections, and what you notice here is that we just talked about modeling and good modeling. So what nouns do you see in these to-dos? You see you see you see planet, right? And planet right here. So we'd probably end up having to model a planet class just to make sure it's good. It's good code, easy to read. And so this is a pretty good class here. It's pretty well written. And we're going to be continuing in the next video.